Good evening from Washington. I'm Larry O'Connor, and we'd like to do a bit of an update on the various charges that Donald Trump is facing right now in various jurisdictions between Manhattan, U.S. court in Washington, D.C., and of course down in Georgia. I think there's also a federal court in Florida. It's hard to keep track. I think that's the whole point here. They're piling on a lot of charges to just taint and overburden the Trump campaign and make you, the people, the voters, feel like there's just something so odious about this man that even if he's not found guilty, well, we couldn't possibly vote for him. It's kind of scary, isn't it, when the law can be used in such a way? Joining us right now is Joe DeGeneva, former U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. And I just want to start there, Joe, because I know that you revere federal law. You revere the Justice Department and our system of jurisprudence in this country. And what we've witnessed in the last couple of months, I mean, you tell me, I feel sick to my stomach when I see how the law is being used so politically here.
Well, I don't think there's any doubt, Larry, that the Democrats have crossed the line that we have not seen in the 250 years of this republic. They have literally weaponized and politicized federal law enforcement in a way that none of us ever could have anticipated. We would always say, sure, you might find a bad U.S. attorney or somebody bad inside the bureaucracy of DOJ, but always the agents would save us. The core people at the career level would save us. Those bets are now all off because it is clear that the corruption at the DOJ, the IRS, the Treasury Department, and the FBI goes from top to bottom. We now know that agents of the FBI were subverting investigations into Hunter Biden, that they tried to corrupt an investigation by the Delaware U.S. Attorney by withholding information, by leaking information to the New York Times, false stories to create misimpressions about evidence. They hid vital clues, such as the famous FD 1023. When you go back and look at the last several years, what you have is federal law enforcement rotten from top to bottom. And anyone who doesn't believe that, who's ever been a federal officer, is lying to themselves because they want to protect the institution.
And Joe, specific to these charges now from Special Counsel Jack Smith with regard to President Trump's behavior after the election and prior to January 6th, if I'm arrested and I'm charged with crimes and I publicly announce that I think that the charges are bogus and I think the judge is biased and I'm not getting a break, I mean, that can all be used against me in a court of law, I would think. What is Jack Smith's concern about Donald Trump speaking publicly on social media about this case? Why shouldn't he be allowed to publicly defend himself? They're trying to rip away his First Amendment rights now, too?
Well, what they've done is, by charging him in multiple jurisdictions, 2 federal cases, they've had the opportunity to get what are called conditions of release. Every time he gets in front of a judge, he has to either post a bond or get a personal recognizance. But in addition, there are conditions of release that the judge imposes about your conduct. One of the conditions is that Trump is not supposed to be talking about the witnesses, the evidence, trying to intimidate people. They have done that purposely. And when I say they, that's Jack Smith, the judges in Georgia, the federal judge in Washington, D.C., Tanya Chutkan, because what they're going to do now is, and they've already filed papers, they're going to say that his public speaking at his various events for his campaign are interfering with jury selection. He's trying to taint the jury pool. No matter how much information they have leaked up till now, they are saying that Donald Trump is responsible for tainting the jury pool, and they are going to get a gag order to shut him up. In addition, they may impose fines on him, or Judge Chutkan has it within her to lock him up for contempt of court, or at least hold a proceeding to hold him in contempt. So this is all about controlling him during the election cycle to shut him up. And if anybody needed any further evidence that this is election interference, this should be the killer.
So let me just understand something here. First of all, he's running for office, so he can't make up if he gives an interview and they ask him about the charges. If he's at a debate stage and they ask him about the charges, he's supposed to say, I can't say anything. Judge says not. That's the court system interfering in the electoral process.
That is exactly correct. And Judge Chutkan and Mr. Smith and Merrick Garland and Christopher Wray will all say, that's not our problem. You can run for president. You just can't do these certain things.
Yeah.
Well, of course, they're trying to stop him from talking about the single most important offensive action taken against him by his opponent, the President of the United States, using the Department of Justice as a weapon in a re-election campaign. This is the evil of this. This is why when the Democrats used the federal criminal justice system to attack their most serious opponent, they created a monstrosity. They are killing the Constitution. They are destroying American politics as we know it, and they don't care.
Joe, there's another, I mean, if everybody listens to the last 6 minutes of what you've laid out here, I'm sure they're catching the irony here that FBI agents and informants at the Justice Department can anonymously leak whatever they want to the Washington Post, to the New York Times, to cable and broadcast networks. It gets trumpeted worldwide. And it taints the jury pool. It intimidates witnesses. It changes the public narrative about these cases, all anonymously and all illegally leaked. But Donald Trump, the man who's accused, can't go on Twitter or social media and write 240 characters saying that he's innocent. That's outrageous.
That's exactly right. It is outrageous. That's exactly what's going on. The federal government has been using its agents and operatives to illegally leak grand jury information to the press, to create prejudice against Donald Trump, pretrial, now post-indictment, pretrial prejudice, to do what? To influence a potential jury pool in 4 jurisdictions, New York, Washington, D.C., Fulton County, Georgia, and Miami, Florida. It is a despicable abuse of power. Not a word from the American Bar Association. All the federal judges keeping mum. All they are doing is, because they all hate Trump, I don't care who they are, I don't care what party they're from, they are ignoring the reality of an assault on the electoral system. It's disgraceful. And there's not much that can be done about it unless the Republicans pick up the cudgel in the House of Representatives. But they can only do so much. This requires a free and honest press, which we do not have anymore.
It also requires an election. If the American people can get so fed up and so angry about this that they throw this entire government out and replace it. Here's the problem. The court dates. I've seen the court dates that these judges have set up and what the prosecutors want. They all coincide with significant dates in the primary season coming up next year. How can we have a fair election with all of this happening?
Well, you can't. These court dates are purposely designed by these judges to interfere with the election cycle. There is no need for these trials to be held right now. They've had their affected damage that they wanted done by having the indictments brought. And by the way, I don't believe that the president's legal team can properly prepare for 4 separate trials in the timeframes that have been given. And they're going to have to start arguing that they cannot be ready, that these trial dates are unacceptable, that they won't be ready, and that the court cannot force them to go to trial when they are not ready. And they have to have this into a massive case that they can do not only publicly for public relations purposes and convincing the public how outrageous this is to control them, but to let the court system, the higher court system, the people who sit on the Supreme Court, who read the papers every day, to understand what is being done to destroy the impartiality and fairness of the jury trial system, and to taint all jurors in all of these various jury pools all over the country. Yeah. It's truly remarkable. This assault is just remarkable.
Meanwhile, the FBI and the Justice Department had possession of Hunter Biden's laptop a full 2 years before the events of January 6th. Everybody think about that for a minute, and still no charges. Thank you, Joe. Great talking with you as always. Thanks for joining us.
You bet.
There's more to come on O'Connor Tonight. Keep it here on Salem News Channel. My journalistic and intellectual superiors over on CNN tell me that Donald Trump will not be on many ballots for 2024 because of the 14th Amendment. Now, they're a lot smarter than me. They're better in every way, but I don't know. The 14th Amendment came out of the Civil War. The language pertaining to insurrection suggests that a person who actually waged insurrection would in fact be disqualified. And last I checked, despite the upwards to 100 criminal charges against Donald Trump, none of them involve insurrection. In fact, of the 1,000 people charged in the events of January 6th, none of them have been charged with insurrection. So, well, again, everyone at CNN is smarter than me, better than me, so I'm not going to go there. But maybe Hans von Spakovsky can help me out. He's a senior legal fellow over at Heritage Foundation. He knows a thing or two about the Constitution, worked in the Justice Department. All right, Hans, how does the 14th Amendment apply here?
Well, in fact, you are smarter than the people at CNN, because all of these efforts to use the 14th Amendment are are doomed to failure. What they're trying to use is Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Remember, that amendment was passed right after the Civil War. They put a provision in because they didn't want former Confederates serving in Congress and in the federal government. So they put in a provision saying that if you'd engaged in insurrection or rebellion, you could not serve in federal or state office. There are many problems with trying to apply that to Donald Trump. The first one, of course, as you just said, he's never been charged or convicted of that. In fact, when the Senate had the opportunity on that issue, remember, they found him not guilty.
Oh, during the impeachment process. That's right. He was charged. He was
Yes.
impeached with insurrection, but he was literally found not guilty.
No, that's correct. But the other thing that CNN analysts and others seem to be ignoring is the fact that Section 3 has a unique provision in it. It said Congress could basically get rid of it with a 2/3 vote of each house. There's no other amendment in the Constitution that's got a provision like that. Congress did exactly that. In 1872 and 1898, they passed 2 amnesty acts that got rid of the disqualifications in Section 3. So yeah, trying to apply it under all these circumstances just doesn't work. And by the way, every lawsuit so far that has been filed over this issue, and remember, numerous such suits were filed last year trying to get members of Congress disqualified the ballot. They all failed.
Okay. So this is very important. So you're telling me 25 years after the Civil War, the thought process was, okay, it's been a quarter century. Let's just, if anyone happened to be, maybe a ranking officer in the Confederate Army and now they want to run for Congress, we're going to go ahead and do it with this. Because I thought that language about 2/3 of Congress in the 14th Amendment was on an individual case-by-case basis. You're telling me that they basically just overrode the whole thing back then?
They did. Now, the 1872 Act had some exceptions, so it still applied. But in 1898, they got rid of all of those.
Wow.
So it basically disappeared. Look, the other big problem, of course, is if anyone had any power to do anything about this, it would be the Congress, not some lone state official deciding that a particular individual is not qualified to be president.
That was my next question, because we've got secretaries of state and attorney general in certain Democrat-run states right now who are saying just that. Michigan, Wisconsin, they're talking about actually doing this on a state-by-state basis. You're saying even if they tried, this is something that has to come out of D.C.?
Yeah, and in fact, there's a decision out of the Arizona State Supreme Court last year when again, an attempt was made to get some congressional representatives from Arizona off the ballot. And the Arizona Supreme Court pointed out that not only had none of them ever been charged with insurrection, but more importantly, there was no federal enforcement statute for this particular provision. And so they dismissed the claims that these people shouldn't be on the ballot.
Right. See, this answers my next question, because you see, Michigan will say, Gretchen Whitmer and the Secretary of State there, they'll say, well, listen, this is a Michigan thing. We've determined that this is the case. But the fact that it affects the Electoral College and it affects the election of the president, Michigan just can't unilaterally do that because it disenfranchises voters in Alabama, right?
No, that's right. And look, we just got a decision from a federal court in Florida tossing out another claim made by this. And what the court said quite correctly is that the average voter doesn't have standing to assert a claim like that. In other words, they don't have the ability to even bring such a claim. And you know what they're relying on, Larry, is remember when Barack Obama was the first president, there were lawsuits filed saying he wasn't qualified to be president because he wasn't they claimed a natural-born citizen
of the
US.
birth certificate thing, yeah, okay.
Right, and those cases all got dismissed because the court said voters didn't have standing to bring a claim like this.
So in other words, they're kind of using a similar tactic, different provision of the Constitution, but these guys who try to get Trump off the ballot are basically using the same tactic as Obama birthers back in 2000.
That is exactly right.
I love that sweet irony. All right, so listen, apparently we've got the Constitution on our side, we've got the law on our side, we've got precedent on our side, we've got logic and reason on our side. Hans, that's not going to stop Democrats. There's going to be one of these states, they're going to do it. So how does this play out exactly?
Well, if, for example, a Secretary of State, say the Michigan Secretary of State, decides that he can't be on the ballot because of the 14th Amendment, then the Trump campaign will sue. And I can tell you that action, that lawsuit would probably very quickly get all the way up to the Supreme Court, because the courts know they've got to make a decision before the primary. And by the way, just some very, very recent news. This has already reached the U.S. Supreme Court. A petition for certiorari, in other words, a request to review, has just been filed with the Supreme Court by a guy out of Florida who claims he's a Republican candidate. His name is Castro, and every lower court threw out his case. So he just filed a petition with the Supreme Court asking them to review the case. If they turn it down, that'll be a sign to everybody else that you don't have a claim.
But again, it hasn't stopped them before, so they will drag this out.
Correct.
This is obviously doomed to failure, but it's meant to be another layer, another pile-on, another, oh, there's more drama with Trump and all of these things. It's meant to basically give this message that the man is disqualified or incapable of actually running for president.
Right, and to cause him practical problems, because at the very same time he's trying to campaign, trying to fight off all these criminal prosecutions, now he may have to go to court to fight these meritless efforts, these other lawsuits, to get him off the ballot.
Which costs more money and will give him more chance. I mean,
Right.
We know that the pressure on attorneys right now who take up the case of Donald Trump, it's almost like writing a death certificate for their own legal career, because they're being ostracized in the legal community.
Well, not just ostracized, but the lawyers in Georgia who were providing him with advice and counsel are being criminally prosecuted by Fannie Willis, the local DA, for doing their job, trying to represent their client.
Could, not to extend the lawfare issue here, but these states' attorney general, these states' secretary of states who try to do this, which on the face of it seemed incredibly legally precarious, let's say, to say the least, this is election tampering. They're trying to tamper with the election, with their office, with their elected office. Is there a case to be made against them for doing that? Like a legal case?
Well, I think that is... unfortunately, probably not. Attorney generals and others, unfortunately, can get away with a lot. If an attorney general were to engage in this kind of misbehavior, well, maybe the state legislature could impeach that AG for their misbehavior.
Yeah.
But, of course, in a blue state, that's not going to happen.
It's not. It is interesting, though. You know, they tell us how bad Donald Trump is. They tell us how, they're throwing, like I said, 100 criminal charges against him in 4 different jurisdictions. They say he's, evil incarnate and shouldn't go anywhere near the White House. He's been twice impeached. And yet he's tied with Joe Biden in the latest national poll. And now they're doing whatever they can to keep the people of their own states to be able to vote in the election. I mean, I would think if he was that bad, they'd have confidence in their own citizens that they would vote against him, but clearly they don't. That tells you something. We'll leave it there, though. We're out of time, sadly. Hans, thank you. Always great stuff, and thank you for giving some perspective. Sadly, I don't think they're going to invite you on CNN, but do what we can. There's more to come on O'Connor tonight. You know that I'm an official member of the media. They give out cards and everything. And so like an official member of the media, when I need facts and information, and really just when I need to know what I'm supposed to think about things, I, of course, turn to actor Rob Reiner. Yesterday on Twitter, he said this. He was commenting on the head of the Proud Boys, Enrico Tarrio, getting sentenced to a 22-year prison sentence. And he said, well, it was for violently storming the U.S. Capitol in an attempt to overthrow the government. Wow, that's significant. He never would have been at the Capitol had it not been for Donald Trump. You do the math. Fascinating. I don't think he was actually at the Capitol. But Rob Reiner said so it's got to be true. Right, Julie Kelly? Owner of the Declassified with Julie Kelly Substack. Because what do you know about this stuff? You're not Rob Reiner.
Once a meathead, always a meathead. Yes, Rob Reiner. But look, he reflects the knowledge base of most Democrats in the left who really believe that Enrique Tarrio and the Proud Boys showed up with hundreds of armed men to overthrow the government and take over the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. Of course, none of that happened. Enrique Tarrio was told to leave D.C. after he was arrested for burning a BLM banner in December of 2020. He wasn't even there. The Proud Boys who were there, who also were convicted and received these excessive sentences from Judge Tim Kelly. You see one of them walking through an open door with police standing nearby, another one just sort of wandering through the Capitol. They weren't destroying any property. They weren't assaulting police officers. Nonetheless, Judge Tim Kelly, in addition to the 22 years Enrique Tarrio received, Judge Kelly has imposed prison sentences totaling 82 years for 5 members of the Proud Boys, who basically did nothing except use inflammatory language in private group chats leading up to January 6th.
Yeah, and he was convicted of seditious conspiracy and some other charges. Interesting, though, Judge Kelly, he likened him to a general rather than a soldier since he wasn't actually there. But he said that he was, and I'm quoting now, the ultimate leader of the conspiracy, which I know that you have some strong feelings about that, and I'll get to them in a moment, but if this guy, Mr. Tarrio, is the ultimate leader of the conspiracy, then what's all this about Donald Trump being the ringleader and stirring everybody up to go and do this? Were they the multiple leaders, or did Donald Trump take his marching orders from Enrique Tarrio?
No, what the government has said, and this is why this continues to pose legal jeopardy for Donald Trump, is this Department of Justice routinely mentioned Donald Trump during the trial. And they even said that the so-called conspiracy that you just referred to began on December 19th of 2020 when Donald Trump tweeted, "Come to D.C. on January 6th, will be wild." This Department of Justice said that was the day that Enrique Tarrio and his troops of the Proud Boys decided that they were going to go to January 6th and allegedly overthrow the government. DOJ also, these prosecutors, and I was in the courtroom when this happened during closing arguments, they played again the September 2020 clip during the presidential debate when Donald Trump said, "Proud Boys, stand back and stand by." DOJ said that that was a call to arms to the Proud Boys, and that's when their recruitment went off the charts. So Tim Kelly's use of the word general was very specific and targeted, because if he's the general, who is he taking orders from? To your point, Donald Trump.
Oh, the commander-in-chief. I see, the commander-in-chief. Yeah. All right. By the way, when the government asserts that, is there any challenge? They may assert that Donald Trump was making a call to arms, but there's no evidence to support that. Was there anybody in the courtroom to actually challenge that and say that assertion has actually no basis in truth?
Oh, absolutely. Look, the defense attorneys in this case worked diligently. They were very devoted. They came up with, good motions. They tried to move this trial out of Washington, D.C. Judge Tim Kelly refused to do so. But look, all of this fell on deaf ears before Judge Tim Kelly. He's a former federal prosecutor in the very same office, D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office, that's prosecuting every single one of these cases. He used to work directly with one of the top prosecutors handling this case. And he's married to a top deputy for D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser. He is a swamp rat. And so he knew exactly what he was doing and just really flagrantly violated the due process and constitutional rights of these defendants. Instead of protecting them, as one defense attorney told me, he acted as another member of the prosecution team. And that's exactly what happened, too, with these excessive sentences. So we'll see what happens from here. We know that Special Counsel Jack Smith still has his D.C. grand jury working on January 6 matters. And I really do not feel like he is finished with Donald Trump, that this existing 4-count indictment is all we're going to see out of Jack Smith for targeting Donald Trump.
I think you're right. They just have to time it for a bad Biden news cycle before they announce what their next step is. Julie, I've read a lot of your coverage here at Declassified with Julie Kelly, your Substack, and I know you don't think that Mr. Tarrio was guilty of seditious conspiracy and didn't deserve a 22-year sentence. But the Proud Boys that were there on the ground that day, do you believe they're guilty of anything? Do you think that there's something they did wrong?
Well, you certainly could charge them with regular trespassing charges, maybe shaking this metal fence that Judge Kelly just turned into a federal crime of terrorism, I guess some sort of vandalism. But the idea that they got together and formed this seditious conspiracy, and look, the burden of proof is basically non-existent for a charge like that.
Yeah.
So they added up all of these felony counts, but sure, they should be charged, but nowhere near to what they have been charged or sentenced. And keep in mind, they've all been in jail.
Right.
For months.
They've served 3 years
actually,
in solitary.
denied release. That's right.
By the way, you talked about how the judges determined that this is a felony, shaking that little, loose barrier that you see sometimes at these rallies. You posted video of the Black Lives Matter protests at Lafayette Square, just yards from the White House, where the Black Lives Matter protesters took that very same barrier, dragged it down and threw it away, and then went right up into the face of Secret Service agents. How many were arrested and convicted that night, Julie Kelly?
Not only were all of those rioters not charged, any of them that were charged, this very same office, DC U.S. Attorney's Office, dropped all of the counts against those rioters. Of course, they posed far more danger to Donald Trump. Recall, he had to go into a bunker, and the media made fun of him for that. These rioters also tried to scale the fences, protecting the White House.
To get to 1,600,
they weren't charged. So the idea that shaking a temporary metal fence on Capitol grounds makes you a terrorist. I mean, we are in totally new territory, Larry. And I'll tell you, Republicans in Congress and across this country have no idea what is happening in these courtrooms and the precedent that is being set for all of us in the future.
Speaking of Republicans in Congress, I know that you were one of the journalists who had access to the January 6th security footage that Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy promised he would release. Where does that stand right now?
So, Larry, they released new guidelines, the House, last week that again put up filters for the American people. Media organizations can go in and view this. I have to go to DC. I have to go to a House building. They have terminals set up. There's hundreds of cameras. It's a very complicated system. I understand that, which is why at first I thought that this was a good idea, that journalists who understand the subject matter could have access to this footage, request clips, etc. But here we are months later. They have set up new filters for journalists to go view this, nonprofits, and defendants. Well, as I posted on Twitter over the weekend, that is not fulfilling House Republican and Speaker Kevin McCarthy's pledge to make this footage publicly available. So over the past few days, I've been in communication with some House officials, and I think that they are retooling that policy, and they are in the process of building a platform so Americans can start to see some of the clips that we have produced, that they have produced, other journalists produced, and I think this will be happening on produced on a rolling basis, which is absolutely necessary for transparency and for Republicans to keep their promise.
Yeah, I agree, and that's good news that pressure like that, mostly pressure from you, Julie Kelly, seems to have gotten them to rethink their position on this. Thank you for staying on it. We'll continue to read Declassified with Julie Kelly. That's her Substack, and you're getting journalism. This is the whole purpose of a Substack. You get reporting and journalism there that you literally aren't getting anywhere else. Thank you, Julie.
Thanks, Larry.
There's more to come on O'Connor tonight on a busy night here at Salem News Channel. And we continue our focus on the nation's economy, not just because it obviously matters to you how much you're spending and how more into debt you're going with credit card interest rates so high, and it's just not good, but also because this looms large for the upcoming presidential election. The economy is always the #1 issue. So why does the president continue to act like he's some sort of great success, given the facts, the reality of what you're dealing with every day? Well, let's bring in Steve Moore. He probably can answer that question for us. He, of course, a founder of Club for Growth and an economist at the Heritage Foundation. Thanks for joining us, Steve.
Hi, Larry.
So the president keeps saying the Bidenomics is working and everything's great right now. It doesn't seem great. So what's he talking about?
Well, there's the old saying about putting lipstick on a pig. I think this economy is in a lot of trouble. I think that for most Americans living on Main Street, USA, who are just, living paycheck to paycheck, the fact that we've had such a, rapid increase in inflation in Biden's first 2.5 years in office have put an incredible financial strain on people. You mentioned, Larry, the credit card debt, which is higher than we've ever seen before in the history of this country. It's 1.03 trillion, not billion, $trillion of credit card debt. More and more Americans are reporting they're having a hard time paying off that debt on a timely basis, which means they're having to face, interest rates on that credit card debt of, as high as 20 to 25%. That's not a very good way to borrow. The average family's lost about $4,000 in purchasing power in Trump's presidency. That's not a lot to celebrate.
Steve, I've noticed that people talk about inflation a lot. We do this on the right as well, and I certainly see pundits talking about it on cable news on a regular basis, as if you can't control it. It's like, well, it's inflation. What are you going to do? Inflation's happening. In fact, can you sort of break this down a little bit in a rudimentary way, if you could, in terms of what causes inflation? They're acting like it's like this act of God or something, or that, well, we have no idea. Prices are just more expensive. It's a fluke. This all comes back to government policy, doesn't it? Every single inflation factor that we're dealing with is either this government's decision, bad decision, or some other government in the global economy's decision.
Well, don't you understand, Larry? This is just Vladimir Putin's fault, right? Remember that when
of course.
when Biden tried to blame it on Putin. Look, the fact is that we had a $6 trillion spending spree when Biden came into office, on top of the $2 trillion that Trump spent on COVID in his last year in office. So you're talking about trillions and trillions of dollars that we spent. We spent more money on all these COVID programs and all the social welfare programs and the green programs under Biden than we did to fight World War II, even adjusting for inflation. So that gives you an indication of how much we spent and borrowed. And it was pretty obvious to any economist with even a high school education that if you spent that kind of money and borrowed that kind of money and printed that kind of money, that would have to cause higher inflation.
Right.
And so, just so you know, Larry, when Trump left office, the inflation rate was about 1.6%, and it averaged 2% during Trump's presidency. And then in the first 18 months of the Biden presidency, it went from less than 2% to 9.2%. Do you think that was just coincidence?
Right.
Of course it wasn't. It was because of this flood, of this tsunami of money that was spent and borrowed by the government, which caused inflation to go through the roof. Now, look, to be fair, the inflation rate has come down from where it was last summer. We're at about 4% today versus 9% back then. But when you look at the goods you have to buy, you've got to buy groceries, you have to pay for gasoline, you have to sometimes buy airline tickets. You have to pay your rent, your mortgage. All of those gone up, by more than 10%. So people aren't feeling the love right now.
Yeah. 63% of Americans disapprove of how Joe Biden has handled inflation. So they're not buying what he's selling. They can see it in real time on a day-to-day basis.
That's right.
Do you believe?
Wait, are you telling me, Larry, that Joe Biden hasn't been to the grocery store lately?
Well, exactly. And here's another shock for you. He's not telling the truth about his record. I know. It's amazing. When it comes to voters, though, we're in the middle of a Republican primary right now. And I don't know about you. Frankly, I wasn't pleased that at the last debate you didn't hear enough beating up on Biden about the economy. This is how Republicans win, no matter who the nominee is.
Yeah, I mean, I met with President Trump a couple weeks ago and with Larry Kudlow, and we talked at length about the economy. And I just told President Trump, your key to winning, if it turns out to be a Trump versus Biden rematch, is to just ask the American people, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Do you remember, Larry, when Ronald Reagan famously used that line against Jimmy Carter?
Yeah.
Well, it would apply today, too. And when you have 70% of Americans saying that the economy is headed in the wrong direction, those are pretty bad numbers. I want to make one other quick point, if I may, Larry, about this inflation issue. You may be following what's happening to gas prices. I think most people are. the price of oil on the international markets has gone up to over $85 a barrel. It was $60 a barrel a few months ago. And OPEC is restricting oil production by 1 million barrels a day. The Russians are reducing their oil production by $300,000 a day to jack up that oil price. You know, we could easily retaliate against that by just producing more oil in the United States. In other words, we could easily be producing 3 million more barrels a day in the United States, which would completely neutralize what OPEC is trying to do. Well, we're not doing that because Joe Biden has declared war on American energy.
Yeah.
So there's a direct example of how Biden's policies are driving up energy costs.
And this is also a perfect example, if I can go back to that, you know, this whole idea that like these invisible factors that affect inflation. This is a perfect example because literally everything you buy at a store or any service you get is related to the cost of oil, right? Because it costs money to move those things here and there, and all the parts needed to make a device has to get on a truck or some sort of device. So if gas is twice as expensive, that means everything that you're buying is that much more expensive. That's inflationary cost directly related to this president's policies.
Yeah, you know, there's this indicator that the economists use a lot called core inflation. And that's a fancy term for what economists say, the inflation rate, not counting food and energy. And I always thought, well, that's a stupid measure.
Who cares? If you can't eat and you can't get anywhere to get your food, what's the point?
Yeah, why do you take that out? So the point is, this is an example of how Biden's policies are directly, now look, there are some geopolitical things that are happening around the world that Biden doesn't have control of. But he could be reducing the gas price. Yeah. And incidentally, gas prices are highly associated. When gas prices go up, presidential approval ratings go down.
This is also, by the way, we only have a half a minute left, but since you mentioned you've got President Trump's ear, this is the kind of thing that President Trump can affect immediately when he gets into office. You talk about turning things around. Just focusing on energy production could be an immediate effect.
Yeah, it would have a huge impact on the price of gasoline, and it also would put America at an advantage in a geopolitical and national security perspective. I mean, why do we want to be spending money to countries like Venezuela and Saudi Arabia and Russia and Iran? By the way, did you see they want to open? Biden wants a new plan to allow more oil to come in from Venezuela, but he won't allow us to produce oil in Alaska and Texas.
Oh, yeah. No, his favorite countries out there are Iran, Venezuela, and China, Steve Moore. You figure it out. All right, we got to leave it there. Thank you, sir. Founder of the Committee to Unleash Prosperity and also the Club for Growth, Steve Moore. There's more to come on O'Connor Tonight. This is the Salem News Channel. As we said yesterday, First Lady of the United States, Jill Biden, has I'm sorry, what? Dr. Jill Biden has contracted COVID-19 again, and we wish her well. But we're wondering about President Biden. After all, they're married. I mean, I know when I got COVID, my wife caught it within 24 hours because, you know, we have a normal, loving marriage and we're around each other all the time, even, you know, kissing each other, and things happen. So what about President Biden, since he's around his loving wife all the time? Let's ask Karine Jean-Pierre.
President Biden tested negative last night for COVID-19 and tested negative again today. He's not experiencing any symptoms. As far as the steps he is taking, since the president was with the First Lady yesterday, he will be masking while indoors and around people in alignment with CDC guidance. And as has been the practice in the past, the president will remove his mask when sufficiently distanced from others indoors and while outside as well.
God, she's not even good at reading the prepared remarks, let alone speaking off the top of her head. But there you go. Despite their very healthy, loving, intimate relationship, Joe Biden did not catch the virus from his wife. But the good news is, whenever he's around anyone in the White House, he'll keep that mask on to protect everybody and himself, except when he's properly socially distanced, then he'll remove the mask. So 30 minutes after that statement, Joe Biden was in the East Room delivering a Medal of Honor to a war hero from the Vietnam War, and there he was with his mask walking down the aisle with people around him. But when he got up on the stage, of course, That's when he could safely take his mask off because there was no one around him, right? Oh my God. I mean, for crying out loud, he's like breathing down his neck and slobbering up in his ear. He's treating this guy like he's, you know, a 17-year-old girl whose dad is about to get sworn into the Senate. He was that intimate. Now, that was Larry Taylor. Larry Taylor is 81 years old and truly an American war hero. It's such a stirring moment to see him receive the Medal of Honor that he so richly deserves, and yet we were all distracted by the fact that we just heard that the president was going to socially distance, and here he is, you know, nearly making out with the guy. But then it got worse. Here's Joe Biden finishing the ceremony and giving Mr. Taylor his well-earned congratulations. Watch what happens. The man literally has no idea what's going on. If we play the tape a little bit further, you'll see that they then had a concluding prayer and a benediction and an end of ceremony and greetings to the It went on for like 10 more minutes. And he just sort of wandered off aimlessly. Did you notice everybody just sort of staring at him as he walked? I was like, where the hell is he going? And maybe he forgot his mask. Maybe, oh, wait a minute, I'm not supposed to be up here without a mask. Let me go get it. Or it was time for his cartoons. I regret to inform you that the President of the United States has mashed potatoes for brains. That said, I don't know if you caught it, but I would like to end this discussion with the man who should be the focus of our attention, and that is, again, Larry Taylor, a hero from the Vietnam War who, as a helicopter pilot, faced incredible danger, risked life and limb to save the lives of his comrades in arms. I want you to see this isolated shot of his face as he sees the commander-in-chief wander aimlessly through the East Room and out of the room during the middle of the ceremony when he got his Medal of Honor award. Take a look at Mr. Taylor's face. Did you see that expression? The hell is wrong with this guy, he says. And they're the same age. In fact, Mr. Taylor's a year older. We only have to last another year and 4 months. We can do it, America. That's it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. Same time, same place. In the meantime, yes, that's right, I said it. Mashed potatoes for brains. I'll see you on the radio.